Let's get some perspective now from former U.S. Ambassador to NATO, Ivo Daalder. Thank you so much for joining us, Ambassador. I'm curious about the disparity between what we're hearing from U.S. officials and Venezuelan officials about this idea that the U.S. is going to run policy in Venezuela. In fact, here is that country's defense minister warning against further U.S. action today.
It was an act of cowardice, but it also represents a threat to the world order. And what has happened against Venezuela can happen to any other country. This is a colonialist aggression and represents a repressive hand over Latin America and the Caribbean, and we reject that.
How do you read that statement in unison with statements that we've heard from President Trump and Secretary of State Rubio about running Venezuela's policy?
Yeah, there's a fundamental contradiction here. On the one hand, we seem to be wanting to tell Venezuela what it is that they need to do, including how they should govern their country. And what they should do with their national resources, but we're not willing to actually occupy the country, put in the capabilities and forces necessary to enforce such writs. So on the one hand, the president is saying that we will, quote, run the country, but the Secretary of State saying is, no, but we won't govern the country. Well, the last time I looked, the only way you can make sure that you can run the country effectively is if you actually govern it. And this contradiction, which has been there from the very moment that the president explained that this was not the kind of law enforcement action that Congress had been told it would be, that indeed Secretary of State Rubio continues to insist it was. This was a military operation, as he said, in support of DOJ, the Department of Justice, effort to apprehend two indicted persons, Maduro and his wife. It is actually a takeover of the country. And this disconnect between the means that we have deployed and the goals that we have set is going to come and bite us in the back. We've been here before. We did it in Afghanistan. We did it in Iraq. We did it in Libya. You'd have thought that a president who ran on the idea of not doing this again would have learned a lesson. But apparently the last 24 hours, that doesn't seem to be the case.
It's notable that during his press conference, President Trump didn't mention the word democracy once. He didn't really talk about guarantees of a democratic process moving into the future, even though that is what Secretary Rubio has said that he would like to see. Do you think we will soon see legitimate elections in Venezuela?
I have no idea. I mean, I thought it was shocking, to be frank, that the president did not use the word democracy, did not even mention Edmundo Gonzalez, who was we recognize as the legally representative of Venezuela, as the winner of the election last July. He clearly won that election. The election was stolen by Maduro. It was one of the reasons we called Maduro illegitimate. But to suggest that you can take out Maduro and then have the regime stay in place, because that's what's really happening by relying on the vice president and the governing structure that exists there, and that somehow through the threat of military action, we kind of can guide policy with Venezuela, strikes me as unlikely to succeed and morally difficult to defend. If this is about democracy, as it should be, then the very least we could do is encourage the forces that have broad public support in Venezuela, including President Gonzalez, including Mrs. Machado, who was clearly the popular, the popular leader behind Gonzalez. But instead, we're saying, no, we'll be happy to work with whomever as long as they do our bidding, which is give our oil back, as if this oil was not Venezuela's from the very, very start.
You actually wrote in your Substack that all of this reeks of 19th century imperialism, that Trump, citing the Monroe Doctrine, centuries old, a convincing basis for an action most of the rest of the world sees as illegal and unwise. How do you think Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping see this, given that they have had interests in Venezuelan oil? The Secretary of State has made the argument that a lot of their resources have essentially been colonized, not only by Russia and China, but also by Cuba.
Yeah, that's an interesting phrase to be used when, in fact, that is what we're setting out to do ourselves, to colonize, to retake oil that that we claim to be ours, but in fact is and always has been Venezuelans. The Chinese buy oil from Venezuela. The United States, the president said the United States will be in the business of selling oil. We are going to be apparently selling oil to the Chinese. Clearly, the Chinese and the Russians, on the one hand, look at this with a sense of worry about what the United States is all about. But on the other hand, they also see some benefit. If we can take out Mr. Maduro, can't Mr. Putin take out President Zelensky? Isn't that what he's been trying to do for the last 4 years? Isn't he, by taking the nuclear power plant, for example, and so much of the territory, isn't he just repeating what the United States is now doing? And doesn't this give Xi Jinping more of a reason to think that if he takes Taiwan, as he says he wants to, as he said in his New Year's address he would want to, that the United States, having done so in its own hemisphere, might not intervene? So this is a deeply destabilizing kind of world. So world we tried to leave behind at the end of World War II. After everything we've gone through, after so much destruction, we build a new world, a new order based on international law and international institutions and American power to enforce it. We're abandoning that world, and the kind of justification we heard from the president yesterday was a return to a world that we long ago passed.
Ambassador Ivo Daalder, we have to leave the conversation there. We appreciate you sharing your point of view.
My pleasure.